Well, it's been about 2 months since my last tier list, and I think it's about time that we all head to the comment section with pitchforks out to argue about which killer is better than the other in Dead by Daylight. Hey guys, DOWSEY here, and welcome back to the home of super educational Dead by Daylight killer content here on YouTube. It is time for the latest version of my tier list, and before we get into it, I want to make sure that you are aware of the way that I rate my killers in Dead by Daylight. This tier list is based on regular public play, just queuing up with a killer into whatever survivors you may find at red ranks, specifically rank 1 because that's where I play permanently, but I don't really believe there's much difference between rank 4 to rank 1, for example. I rate my killers with these factors in mind. The first is map control. That is a killer's ability to control the entirety of the map, regardless of what map they're playing on. Usually this means that movement is a big factor in map control. A killer who can control a larger area of generators is going to be rated higher than one that cannot. The second factor is lethality. This is the ability for a killer to end a chase quickly, whether that be through insta-downing or hitting a survivor twice very quickly. Lethality is just how quickly they can end chases to secure hooks. The third factor is snowball. This is a term that often people don't understand. Imagine you roll a snowboard down a hill. As that snowball goes down the hill, it becomes larger and larger in size as it collects snow off the ground. Eventually, this snowball becomes so big that it can no longer be stopped. And this is what snowballing is in Dead by Daylight. It is gaining a lead over your opponents via exponential pressure that you can then use to win the game quickly. Of course, the most notable way of doing this in Dead by Daylight is via slugging. The fourth category that I consider is a killer's ability to play on all maps. If a killer has bad maps and good maps, then they're probably going to be rated lower than a killer that is a good all-rounder. And finally, I do consider perks and add-ons in my decisions. I consider all these killers to be playing with a build that is very good for them and with perks that are green and below, because once you start getting into the purple and pink territory, the very and ultra rare add-ons, I think it changes the power quite drastically. And I also don't think it's very realistic that a killer can play with those add-ons every game that they play, whereas it's more realistic that they can equip a green, yellow, or brown add-on every game that they play. So without further ado, I'm going to start my stopwatch and attempt to speak about each killer for roughly 2 minutes each as we go from the best killer to the worst killer in Dead by Daylight. Sitting at the top of the tier list uncontested is the Nurse. The Nurse is the most mechanically intensive killer in Dead by Daylight, and because of this, she is very difficult to pick up. But once you have spent hours mastering the Nurse, she suddenly becomes lethal in the hands versus any survivor team. Her ability to traverse the map quickly and end chases almost instantly is second to none, and when it comes to add-ons, her best are a green and yellow combo of recharge speed. It is very difficult for any survivor team to be able to defeat a good Nurse, and she is probably the killer that will most consistently 4K regardless of what is thrown at her. Use Infectious Fright to snowball any game out of control for the survivor team. The Nurse can easily slug each survivor very quickly if she is given the opportunity to do so. I think that most people will agree that even despite the rework that happened a couple months ago, the Nurse still sits very strong in the meta if you can master her. Coming in second is everyone's favorite killer in Dead by Daylight. Of course, it is the Spirit, who for some people can rival the Nurse for that top spot. The Spirit's add-ons are probably some of the best in the game in the sense that her base kit is very, very strong, and then all of her add-ons make her stronger when you consider what they do to that base kit. She doesn't really have any bad maps either, which makes her a very good pick for this second spot. Arguably, her lethality in chase is second to none, especially because a lot of survivors still struggle with the good old standstill mind game. As long as you slap on one of these bad boys, you should be very capable of finding a survivor who is injured, and if you use Strider, then how the survivor's meant to get away from you. The Spirit is a fearsome killer, and rightfully so, deserves a spot in the God tier. I don't believe any other killer is currently at the same level as Nurse and Spirit, so I'm going to move down to the A tier, starting off with the Oni. The Oni arguably has the strongest power in the game. For 45 seconds, you can basically eliminate the entire survivor team with Blood Fury. Add duration or scalped top knot to this guy, and it almost becomes impossible to run him when Blood Fury is coming at you. He is countered by one small thing, and that is, of course, playing extremely safe at the beginning of the game and insta-dropping any pallets you come to. However, let's be real, how many survivors actually do this when they play versus the Oni? In public matches, I would say that the Oni is one of the most fearsome killers to play versus, especially if your teammates don't understand the simple concept of safe looping. His only map weaknesses would be indoor maps due to the fact that it's hard to turn around those, so you can't get full usage out of Blood Fury, but of course you can just demon strike a survivor once you've got close to them, and so that is negated entirely. He has strong lethality and even stronger snowballing, and I think a good Oni is one of the scariest killers to play versus. The only reason I can't put him in S tier is because maybe 1 in 100 games you'll play versus a survivor who understands the concept of safe looping on a strong map such as Mount Ormond, and that is going to put you massively behind as the Oni. However, if you're playing to your strengths as killer, you should be able to identify that this survivor won't be caught through the simple act of looping, and you should immediately focus your attention elsewhere. The next killer I'm going to place in the tier list is going to be the Hag. The Hag is probably one of the most annoying killers to play versus, as she is able to very efficiently and effectively lock down an area of the map and forces survivors' movement to be extremely slow, else they will die. Once you get hooked in an area that the Hag wants to play around, you are pretty much done for the rest of the game, as her ability to proxy camp and control that area, preventing the survivors from even getting close for an unhook safely, is second to none. Her playstyle may be boring for most, but she is extremely effective at what she does, and I think that most survivor teams struggle with dismantling the control that a Hag has. For anyone in the comments section who's like, it's very easy, just use flashlights, set off her traps, get rid of them while she's hooking. Yes, of course, there are measures that you can do to counter the Hag's performance, but I would wager if you're finding it easy to play versus the Hag, then you're probably playing versus Hags that chase you rather than lock down an area of the map and use their traps to win the game. Because of these counters, however, I cannot place her any higher than A tier, and I think this is a really reasonable place to put her. The next killer I'm going to place in the tier list may be controversial to some, and honestly, I want to place Pyramid Head higher than this. When it comes to competitive Dead by Daylight play, Pyramid Head is considered by most the third best killer to play in competitive, but this is not a competitive tier list, and so I'm going to place him here. Pyramid Head's map control is very different from the rest of the roster in the sense that he doesn't have any mobility to go across the map, and so his map control comes through other aspects. Whether the Pyramid Head decides to cage a survivor or hook them is a really important decision that all good Pyramid Heads need to make. His ability to counter perks such as Decisive Strike and Borrowed Time and prevent exhaustion perks from instantly resetting is very powerful, and a Pyramid Head who wants someone out of the game quickly can remove them quickly. One of the strongest factors that the Executioner has going for them is his ability to end chases very quickly with his Punishment of the Damned. It is almost impossible to make the right decision when looping a very good Pyramid Head because he is able to punish you if you drop the pallet and punish you if you don't drop the pallet, removing much agency from a survivor's ability to loop him. The snowball factor for the Pyramid Head comes from his ability to cage someone quickly if necessary, or hook a survivor and then cage them afterwards to send them to their second hook stage. Right now, I don't think there's many people who have mastered Pyramid Head's playstyle, but give it a little bit and we're going to start seeing that Pyramid Head is probably one of the strongest killers in Dead by Daylight. Up next is a killer who is just consistently good and is never a bad choice if you're trying to rank up in Dead by Daylight. It's the Nightmare or Freddy. Freddy is a killer that gains pressure passively through his dream state, and the survivors going into it every 60 seconds. If you decide to bring add-ons that slow down action speed, then you have essentially extra control over the game, but his real control comes from his ability to cross-map teleport to whichever generator you want to control. Perks like Discordance and Tinkerer alert you whenever a generator is at threat, and using Pop Goes the Weasel or Ruin, you can teleport to that generator to make sure that the survivors never finish it. His chases can be quite short as well, with good Dream Snare placements, and if you use Save the Best for Last, it makes unhooking very risky versus Freddy, as his Dream State causes the Oblivious status effect, which means that Borrowed Time is rendered useless versus Freddy, and you should be able to down the survivor rescuing and then down the survivor who's come off the hook as well, giving you massive snowball potential. Freddy is an excellent choice for anyone who doesn't want to learn someone mechanically intensive, but has a good understanding of game fundamentals and how to contest generators. You can't go wrong with Freddy. Freddy's nothing special, he gets the job done, and I think he's an A tier killer. Here's someone that you're probably curious as to where I would place. Billy comes in at last in the A tier. I actually don't think that Billy's rework was enough to remove him from the A tier, but I have moved him to the bottom of the A tier due to the fact that he's lost his Insta Chainsaw as well as his Crackhead build, which was Carburetor and Doom Engravings, or Doom Mix build, which was the ability to use the chainsaw at regular charge speed with extra cooldown. It's just, those are gone now, so Billy's lethality has gone down just a little bit. Despite the overheat mechanic, he still has excellent map control and really strong lethality, and his snowball is still as good as ever with the use of Infectious Fright. It's going to be harder to down survivors who are more efficient with their looping, as you don't have the super strong add-ons that made Hillbilly so good, but he is still in a very good spot regardless, and you should still be able to do very well with him if you have good chainsawing mechanics. Hillbilly does have a slight problem with maps that aren't very good for him, such as Leary's The Game and Hawkins National Laboratory, and that's something you have to consider when playing the Hillbilly, is that if you do get one of those maps, your chances of winning are reduced significantly, and I don't feel it's fair to place him high in a tier if he can't play every map to a good potential. Moving on to our next tier, I want to talk about the distinction between B tier and C tier. Both of these are your effective mid tier, but I think that it's worth noting that some of the killers in the mid tier are much stronger than others, and so I've split them into the high and the low of the mid tier. Huntress is going to be the first killer that we talk about in the mid tier. Like the Hillbilly, Huntress struggles with closed off maps such as indoor maps or any map that has a lot of trees that will block those cross-map snipes. And with dedicated servers being a little bit funky, sometimes you get no regs as well, which definitely goes against her. But a good Huntress knows about all of these and can play around all of these factors that I believe make Huntress weak to a degree, and snowball heavily through her ability to hit survivors at range and across maze tiles like no other killer can. If you master the Huntress, you can basically ignore all of her weaknesses and very consistently 4K even on maps that aren't in your favor. And I think it is worth saying that Huntress is a strong killer. She has weaknesses, but if you do master her, you'll do well with her. This is quite a sizable difference from my other tier lists. I have gone back to the drawing board and really thought about whether or not the weaknesses of Huntress was worth placing her any lower than the B tier. And I decided, actually, yeah, I think that probably it's justifiable to have her up here. I can't quite put her in A tier due to all her weaknesses, but the top of B tier is quite a strong placement for the Huntress, and I think this will make a lot of people happy. The Cannibal almost got the Freddy treatment in that now he has high lethality, he has high snowball, his add-ons are actually good. Chili is a very viable choice if you want to make sure you hit survivors in chases. His perk peel variety has gone through the roof, as you no longer need to stack Play With Food and Nemesis if you just want to have a chance at catching survivors. Really, the Cannibal's only weakness is the fact that he cannot go any faster than 115% movement speed outside of using his power, which I don't think is really a viable way to cross the map. And so he has to lock down an area of the map, much like every other 115% or 110% movement speed killer. Give him an area of the map that he control efficiently, he will remove all of the pallets in that area of the map very quickly and basically turn that area of the map into a dead zone that makes it impossible for a survivor team to defeat him. I think the Cannibal is in a really strong place right now. He can literally outrun Sprint Burst if he times his chainsaw correctly. He is nuts. Next in my list is going to be the Plague, who received a sizable buff a couple of months ago, which made it so she always started with a Pool of Devotion. This tiny little change for the Plague changed the way that you have to play versus her, as previously, not cleansing versus the Plague was a very efficient playstyle that denied her a lot of power in the game, and so you had to run perks that punish that playstyle. Now, you have a Pool of Devotion at the start of the trial that you can use, and if you want to stack apples to bring more Pools of Devotion, then you can essentially consume that Corrupted Purge immediately and go to town trying to snowball immediately. The Plague's lethality through her Vile Purge and then snowball through Corrupt Purge is very, very strong and very difficult for teams to deal with. Her weakness, of course, is if you split up versus the Plague, then she loses a lot of that snowball ability, but you can hook a survivor in an area that you want to control, and then the survivor team will be forced to come to you, which allows you to snowball very heavily from that situation. She does have 1,000,001 decisions that she has to make correctly throughout the trial, and because of this, I don't want to place it any higher, but make those decisions correctly, and you're going to do very well with the Plague. Put your cowboy hat on. Let's go to the Dead Dog Saloon, because Deathslinger is next up in the B tier. The Deathslinger is an excellent killer in the 1v1. His chases can be so short, especially if you put Save the Best for Last on for that 1-2 punch combo. He does struggle a little bit with his map control being a 110% movement speed killer, but he makes up for it by having a short terror radius that with Modern Abuse you can reduce even more so. And due to the fact that his terror radius isn't your default terror radius sound, it's a custom one made for him, there's actually this strange effect that happens that kind of gives him an extra couple of meters on the terror radius that the survivors really don't hear you coming. Unfortunately, Dead by Daylight is a 4v1 game, and so despite his 1v1 capabilities, he can struggle on maps that are too large for him or maps that he struggles to lock down a specific area. I do think that he has add-on combos that make him very difficult to play versus, such as the double reload combination of add-ons, and because of this, his 1v1 potential can leak into the 4v1 aspect if he generates enough snowball pressure through downing survivors very quickly. We're already starting to see some people main Deathslinger and pull off shots that never were conceivable, and I do think that eventually we'll get to a stage where someone has put thousands of hours into Deathslinger and is really showcasing some really high level play of this killer, and then maybe then we start to consider whether or not Deathslinger is actually better than Huntress. But for now, I'm going to put him in the same tier as Huntress, but slightly lower than her, as we have far more data to go off. He's still a very strong pick and one of the feared killers in Dead by Daylight. The developers have finally fixed my favorite puppy in Dead by Daylight. Demo, please, thank you, says me. He can now hit a full range shred due to the bug being patched out in the latest update. Honestly, this little bug fix alone has made me feel a lot better about Demogorgon's positioning, because you can now hit some nasty shreds onto survivors that previously were not possible. Place portals around 4 generators that you want to control, and it is almost impossible for the survivor team to contest those generators with the usage of Pop Goes the Weasel, Discordance, Thrilling Tremors Barbecue, or even Tinkerer. He has the ability to lock down areas so well, probably better than every other killer in the B tier. But when you do go versus a very capable survivor, you'll notice that they're able to loop you very effectively, dodging the shred with just sound cues alone and making it difficult for you to generate that snowball pressure. In most circumstances though, the Demogorgon is a very consistent killer and should be able to lock down the map very effectively, and I think that he's finally found a home here in the high mid tier. Laughing his way up in the next section is the Doctor, who I'm going to place just below Demogorgon. The Doctor is an anti-looping killer that has passive map control through his Static Blast and Madness tiers. I've seen some Doctor players really shut down teams just knowing when they can use that Static Blast to hit many survivors at once and force them off generators, force them off heals, and put them in dangerous positions. His shock ability is very effective, and running discipline add-ons or even restraint add-ons make him very hard to deal with. If you aren't hitting your Static Blast as effectively or locking down an area in the map that you want to control, then the Doctor could be considered weaker than the B tier, but I do think that he's a killer that rewards someone for excellent game knowledge, understanding of where the survivors are, and making the right decision constantly. His lethality is entirely user dependent. It all comes down to your ability to time those shocks correctly to either prevent a pallet drop or lock a survivor at a pallet once they've dropped it. And you snowball your advantages slightly different to other killers by making sure that the survivors have always got high madness tiers so that they cannot work generators anywhere near as quickly as possible. The Doctor has a lot of moving parts in the background that I think people often overlook, and those moving parts often dictate whether the game is successful for the Doctor or unsuccessful. Here's a killer that I've really struggled to place this time in the tier list. I think I'm going to put Ghostface at the bottom of the B tier. In my opinion, the Ghostface is the strongest stealth killer in the game because he has the most control over when his terror radius is audible to the survivors or when he turns it off and hides his red stain from the survivors. Due to his versatility with his stealth play, this opens up many combinations of perks which can complement a multitude of playstyles. Whether you want to lean stalk to try and snowball your pressure quickly, or hit and run to set up map control and pressure on the survivor team that allows you to one by one take them out, the choice is really in your hands. He is a 115% movement speed killer that doesn't have any other way to control the map outside of his stalking or his ability to keep survivors injured for long periods of time, and so it really does come down to you making the correct decisions and locking down an area of the map that you want to control. His Chewed Pen and Olsen's Address Book add-on combo, which reduces the Night Shroud recovery rate by 14 seconds, is his strongest add-on combo by far. And from that perspective, you might actually argue that he doesn't have very good add-ons because he has one set of add-ons that is probably his strongest over the rest of them. But if you run that add-on combo every game, and you should be able to do so by putting blood points into him, then the Ghostface is a very competitive killer that you can run into pretty much any map. Well, maybe not every map. He does struggle with the Orderhaven realm because of its openness and the ability for the survivors to see you coming. And of course, corn maps can make it hard to stalk as well, but he doesn't really struggle with corn maps anywhere near as Michael Myers. And if you do put him on an indoor map, then he's pretty much a guaranteed win. Moving down to the low mid tier, our first killer to talk about is the Pig. The Pig is kind of a jack of all trades in the sense that she does a lot of things, but none of them particularly well. Her stealth play is probably the worst out of any of the stealth killers. She has a chase mechanic in her ambush dash, but a lot of killers can loop better than she can. And then she has passive map control in her bear traps, but they are purely RNG based, and the survivor might get the bear trap off in 20 seconds, or maybe they get it off in 2 minutes 30. Regardless, it is inconsistent. Despite all these factors that the Pig faces, I think she's a killer that can be mastered, and when someone does actually put time into controlling her ambush dash and using it effectively at many maze tiles, this can end chases quickly enough that she has solid lethality. And her map pressure is going to be better than most people because even though the bear traps are inconsistent, they are something that other killers do not have, and they do slow down the game. Unfortunately for the Pig, I would argue that her best add-ons are yellows and browns, and that kind of goes against her because you want add-ons that are going to considerably buff your performance, and she doesn't really have those. I don't think she's as bad as many of the player base say she is, but she's definitely not up there with the rest of the B or A tier killers. Here's a killer that may shock you coming into the C tier. It is going to be the Legion. The Legion is an enigma in Dead by Daylight in the sense that his lethality is one of the worst in the game, but many people consistently will 4K with the Legion. I think this is because his map pressure and map control is much harder to define than the rest of the killers. Feral Frenzy does a great job of applying a lot of injured state pressure to the majority of the survivor team. And right now, I think that we have a survivor meta that actually rewards the Legion for being able to injure survivors very quickly. Yes, of course, if you go into a team that is very comfortable being injured and will just sit on generators whilst injured, then Legion is going to struggle to apply pressure as his lethality is one of the worst in the game. But as soon as those survivors spend any amount of seconds not working generators, mending, and then healing themselves or each other, then I would say that the Legion generates snowball pressure like no other killer. And unfortunately, I think that we do see survivor teams do that far more often than we should do at red ranks. And so instead of putting Legion in the trash tier like normal, I'm going to put him up in the C tier and recognize the fact that sometimes survivors do not play the game efficiently. And when that happens, the Legion is a really solid killer. I maintain the fact that I do think that Legion's strength in the meta is currently got everything to do with his opponents and almost nothing to do with his kit alone. But I'm recognizing the fact that Legion does do well in most trials that he plays in, and that's purely because survivors don't play efficiently. The Clown received a small buff in that he no longer gets slowed when he throws bottles, and I think that this buff is enough to knock him up into the C tier. Whilst the Clown doesn't have much map control, he is pretty much on the same level as a Bubba, Deathslinger, Doctor, or Ghostface, and his chases now have much more lethality than they did before because he can actually catch a survivor very quickly. You can throw your bottles relentlessly at a survivor, catching them out in a dead zone and slowing them down to get your first hit very quickly. And if you use add-ons such as the reload speed add-ons, then you do not really get punished for having to reload mid-chase, which is a huge plus as well. I'm not sure we've quite seen the hidden potential of the Clown, but I do think that that small buff is enough to take him out of the trash tier and recognize that his chases are now pretty good and he can lock down an area very effectively with these bottle tosses. Moving down to the D tier, I want to talk about a killer that has suffered the most from power creep. To put it simply, power creep is when new additions to the game leave older ones underpowered due to the fact that the new additions are more powerful than the older ones. And I think that Michael Myers is a perfect example of this definition. When it comes to his ability to stalk survivors and expose them, Ghostface is the better pick. Or if you want to talk about a killer that can keep survivors one-shottable throughout the entire trial, then why would you not just pick Plague? Michael Myers has probably the worst map control in the game currently, as he starts the trial at 105% movement speed and has to stalk his way up to a regular speed of 115. And depending on the map you get, this is actually extremely difficult, especially if the survivor team have perks that help them identify you coming quicker, such as Spine Chill. Eventually, you will get your Evil Within 3 as Myers, but once you do, if you decide to slug and attempt to snowball, we are currently in a meta where the majority of survivors bring Unbreakable and DS, and they're just going to pick themselves up if you attempt to do that. I think that the current survivor meta makes Michael Myers very difficult to play, and power creep has put him in a position where he is just nowhere near as viable as other killers that have kind of just directly replaced what he can do. And whilst D tier might be a very harsh place to put him, I'm not saying that you can't win with Michael Myers. In fact, I consistently do 4K with Michael Myers and I'm able to snowball versus teams. It is such a hard job to get to that stage every game. I work harder on Michael Myers than I do almost every other killer. I think power creep has put him in a position where there's really no reason to pick him over Ghostface or Plague or any of the other killer roster. When people ask me who I want to see reworked the most, I think Myers is the killer that comes to mind due to the fact that power creep has just put him in a position that is unfavorable. Next up in the tier list, I'm going to place Wraithy Boy. I think that Wraith is a very viable killer and one that's going to do very well when it comes to pipping and leveling up, but this tier list doesn't really consider that as a thing that makes a killer strong. Wraith actually has much better map control than a lot of other killers, especially when you use Windstorm add-ons, as his cloak naturally is faster than 115%. But you can see his shimmering effect approaching from miles away, and then when you ring the bell to uncloak, the survivor has a lot of reaction time and a sprint burst kind of renders him less strong. Wraith is another example of a killer that suffers from power creep, because if you want to cross-map very quickly undetectable, then use Demogorgon, or if you want to approach a survivor stealthily, then just use Ghostface. I think he is also in need of a little bit of an add-on rework. Windstorm should probably be base kit at this stage because he is almost not playable versus very strong survivors without it. Finally, I'm going to round this tier list with Trapper, and I'm going to place him in the E tier. I'm preparing for Otstarver to content strike this video, but actually, to be honest, I think that he may agree with me that Trapper is currently struggling. Trapper has to currently go around the map to collect his traps to then place them in an area that he wants to control, which means that he has to go to that area, place a trap, then go into the middle of the map, grab that trap, go back to the area, place the trap, go across the map, get another trap, go back to the area, place a trap, and by the time he's done this, gens are flying. Yes, you can run Corrupt Intervention to lock down that area a little bit more efficiently, and you probably need to, or else you're going to struggle with controlling generators for the rest of the game, but Trapper just is in a position where he has to go out of his way to use his power more so than any other killer. And then once he's actually positioned his traps, they can be disarmed by survivors. He has the RNG factor that a survivor in a trap might escape in just seconds after being trapped. And of course, maybe the survivor team just never goes into the area that you trap and you predict wrong the area that you should be playing around. I will recognize that Trapper has a high level of snowball and a game can go from absolutely lost to 1 in seconds if multiple survivors step in the wrong traps, but I don't think that is ever a strategy that you should rely on in Dead by Daylight, because that is basically wishing upon the gods to win a game rather than you influencing that happening. I don't know how you would rework Trapper to bring him up in the meta currently. I think that making him start with all his traps would be very abusable. The first survivor you find, you just place 10 traps around them, and good luck ever rescuing that survivor off a hook if the killer decides to proxy camp. Trapper is in a bad place, and I don't really know how you fix him, but I do think that he's the worst killer we've got in the meta. And there you have it. That's my full tier list laid out in front of you. I don't know whether you agree with it, but this is my current thoughts based on the current meta of Dead by Daylight and what I believe personally makes a killer strong. Keep in mind, I stream 4 times a week playing every killer at red ranks, and I consistently win with all of the killers in the roster. So I am not saying that the killers to the bottom of the tier list are unplayable or not viable. I just believe that you have to work so much harder to get your 4K than the killers that are at the top of the tier list. Whether you agree with me or not, I would love to hear from you in the comments section below as to what your thoughts of the current meta of Dead by Daylight are and what killers you think are stronger than others. I would ask that if you do leave a comment agreeing or disagreeing with myself or someone else, that you do so respectfully, as this place should not be somewhere that people feel the right to belittle and abuse other people's opinions. Discuss responsibly, friends. And let me know if you would like me to release a new tier list soon, placing the Blight into my current tier list. I have some thoughts of where he might place. Currently, I think on the PTV, he might actually be near the top of the B tier, but if they're able to fix some of his power, then maybe he moves up to the A tier, or maybe he's even the next S tier killer, or maybe I'm wrong and he's actually trash. I'm not going to give you too much thoughts. You have to wait and find out what I think of the Blight after he releases. I'm not going to do a tier list of a killer until I've played many hours of them. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notification bells so that you can get notified every time I go live with a super educational Dead by Daylight video. I'm sure this video has lasted too long already, so I'm going to call it there. I'll catch you on my next one, or you can catch out one of those over there.